Welcome again to the 10th reading of Ynglinga Saga. And we start after last time we finished off with King Gudlaug's death. And we start with chapter called On King Hake this time. The brothers Erik and Jörund became very famous because of these actions. They were held to be much greater men than before. They heard that King Hake in Svitjod had let his champions go. So they set out for Svitjod and gathered an army. Of course, Erik and Jörund were King Yngve Alreksson's sons, so they were the real claimants to the throne in Sweden, while King Hake, who was the brother of the sea king Hagbard, most likely was from areas within what is now Norway. They heard that King Hake in Svitjod had let his champions go, so they set out for Svitjod and gathered an army. When the Svitjod heard that the Ynglings had come, hordes of men came to join their army. Afterwards, they laid up in Lågen and set course for Uppsala to meet with King Hake. But he came out at them at Fyrisvollene with a much smaller army. There was a great battle, and King Hake went forth so fiercely that he felled everyone that came close to him. And in the end, he felled King Eirik and chopped down the brothers' banner. Then King Jörund fled towards the ships, and his whole army with him. King Hake received such grave wounds that he saw that the days of his life could not last long. He then took a long ship he owned and loaded it with dead men and weapons, let it float out to sea, where he set course and sail and set fire to resin wood and made a bonfire on the ship. At that point, Hake was dead or close to dead, and he was then laid on the fire. The ship sailed out to the ocean in flames, and this was held in great awe for a long time after. Jörund's death. Jörund, son of King Yngve, became king at Uppsala. He ruled the lands and went often raiding with his army during the summers. One summer he went with his army to Denmark. He wreaked havoc in Jutland, and in the autumn he came into Limfjorden and wreaked havoc there. He settled his army at Oddesund. Oddesund is, if you look at Limfjorden, the Limfjord on a map today, this is the fjord that goes divides the northern part of Jutland from the mid and southern part of Jutland. And Limfjorden goes through one of the largest cities in Denmark called Aalborg. And Oddesund is, if you follow the Limfjorden westwards into the last bay of Limfjorden, there's this sound which is called Oddesund, where they say he lay his forces. And strategically it's probably a good place, because he could control the traffic there, and it wouldn't be like a large. He would be safe, because at that time Limfjorden wasn't open to the West Ocean as it is today. This happened sometime mid 1800s, that the water broke through from that side. Broke through naturally first. Now it's like also an artificial opening, well, strengthened artificially. Anyway, at that time they would have had an enclosed bay in the inner part of Limfjorden. So strategically made kind of sense. On the other hand, if a great army came towards them, there was no escaping. Anyway, that's where they lay up. Then Gylaug, King of Hålogoland, son of King Gudlaug, whom we spoke of before, came with a great army. And these were the kings of Hålogoland, which is in Norway on the coast, going north of Trondheim, from the north of Trøndelag, which is the region surrounding Trondheim, and it goes up along the coast, way up north, and usually one says up to Lyngen in Troms, which are some really alpine mountains in the north of Tromsø. But I think at that time, before it got really cold in the 1200s, it would have went further up as well. There are old place names, Norse place names, that go further up than Lyngen. Yeah, then Gylaug, king of Hålogoland, son of King Gudlaug, whom we spoke of before, came with a great army. And he set to battle with Jörund. And when the people of the lands became aware of this, they came from all directions, both in large ships and small ones. King Jörund was overpowered by them, and his ship wrecked. So he jumped overboard and started swimming away. But he was taken prisoner and taken to land. King Gudlaug then ordered a gallows raised. He led Jörund there and had him hanged. And so ended his life. So says Tjodolf. Was Jörund, who died in former times, bereaved of his life in Limfjorden, when the high-breasted Sleipnir of linen cords, the bane of Gudlaug, would bear the burden. And Hagbard, the Lord chose, the hard rope around the throat went. So this kenning is filled up with metaphors that are from the to cool kenning that we've spoken of many times before. To tame the cool horse of Signe's lover, which is Hagbard and Signe, and the story about Hagbard and Signe, where Hagbard hangs himself and Signe commits suicide. They have an illegal love affair. So Hagbard, to tame Hagbard's horse, is to hang. And here we have the Sleipnir of linen cords. So this is hanging ropes. The bane of Gudlaug will bear the burden. So this is Jörund, who was the bane of Gudlaug. And Hagbard's hard rope is, of course, the hanging rope. Yeah. King Aun's death. Jörund's son was called Aun, or Åne, and he was king over the Sviards after his father. He was a very wise and great blotman. So a man who administered, was king, but also administered ritual sacrifices. He was not a man of war. He sat at home in the lands. During the time these kings were at Uppsala, as we have spoken of now, Dan the Great ruled Denmark. He became very old. Then his son Frode the Great, or the Peaceful, then his sons Halfdan and Fridleif. They were great warriors. Halfdan was the elder and the foremost among them in all things. He went with his army to Svitjod against King Aun, and they held some battles, and Halfdan most often held the victory. In the end, King Aun fled to West Gautland, which is called Västgötaland, today in Sweden. He had then been king over Uppsala for 25 winters. He was also in Gautland for 25 winters, while Halfdan was king at Uppsala. King Halfdan died the illness death at Uppsala, and he is mounded there. I'm writing mounded. It's when they built burial mounds. Instead of saying he was buried or he was buried in a mound, in the Norse, even today in Norwegian and probably Swedish and Danish, at least in Norwegian, you say hauglagt, which is mound laid. So I'm translating it more literally. Hauglagt. He is mounded there. After that, King Aun returned to Uppsala. He was then 60. He held a great blot and bloated for his long life, and gave Odin his son, and his son was given as blot. King Aun then received an answer from Odin that he still had 60 winters to live. Aun was then king at Uppsala for 25 winters. Then came Ole the Bold with his army to Svitjod. He was the son of King Frileif. He came against King Aun, and they held battles, and Ole was most often the victor. For the second time, King Aun fled his kingdom and went to West Gautland. Ole was king at Uppsala for 25 winters, until Starkad the Old killed him. Starkad the Old is the great warrior we heard of before. After Ole fell, King Aun again went to Uppsala and ruled there for another 25 winters. He then again held a great blot for his long life, and he gave his second son as blot. Blot, of course, is a ritual sacrifice. Then Odin told him that he would live forever, as long as he gave Odin one of his sons every 10th year, and in addition, that he should give name to a shire in his lands according to the number of the son he had given in blot to Odin. When he had given 7 sons in blot, he lived a further 10 winters, and then had no power to walk, so he was carried around in a chair. He then gave his 8th son as blot, and lived another 10 winters, and lay in bed. He then gave his 9th son in blot, and lived another 10 winters. By then he drank from a horn like an infant. He then had only one son left, whom he wished to give in blot, and would give Odin Uppsala and the shires around, and call it Tiundaland, which means the 10th land. The Sviar banned him from doing so, and no blot was held. Afterwards, King Aun passed away, and he is mounded at Uppsala. It has since been called Ånasott when a man dies without infection from age. Sott is illness. So says Tjodolf. At last, at Uppsala, Ånasott took hold of Aun, and the hard-lived had to beg for the child's food a second time. And of the bulls turned towards himself the sword, the slender, the yoke reindeer's reddener of kingsmen, the sword's tip he lying drank. Grey-haired, the herd sword, the eastern king could not hold. So it's a beautiful poem, but using kennings to make a lot of drama out of a relatively boring death, in my opinion, which probably is a good death. So these very dramatic kennings: the sword, the slender, yoke reindeers, reddener of kinsmen. It's a kenning for the horn. So alluding to that when he was too old and completely incapacitated, he had to drink from a horn like an infant. And the herd sword is also a bull's horn or an oxen's horn. And the Eastern king is the king at Uppsala, and he could not hold it in the end. Yeah. So I think that wraps up for this time. Maybe just a little comment on there can be some confusion when they mention in the sagas at different times when they are in Vend or in Jutland, Denmark, in Götaland, Gothland, and these places, because these areas is a little bit unclear, and it shifts throughout the time. Like what is today Sweden and Norway and Denmark is quite different from what was, say, when at the start of the Kalmar Union in 1387, when all the three countries got together, where there were large tracts of what is Sweden today going down through the southeastern region of Bohuslän, and northwards towards Härjedalen and Jämtland. These were parts of Norway. And Halland, Blekinge, the southern part, which kind of faces Zealand or Sjælland of Sweden, was part of Denmark. And then you have that what is the Geatish, Eigotaland, Gotland. This area, Gothland, can be a little bit hard to navigate. I think in Ynglinga Saga, when we're in the Iron Age, Gotland can be many things. The old, what we call Jylland in Denmark, and which is called Jutland in English. Actually, if you go way back in the Iron Age, this was also called, Jutland comes from Gotland. And the pronunciation isn't necessarily with a hard G. Like in Swedish today, you don't say Gothenburg, it's a Göteborg. And perhaps that's why Jylland has a more soft pronunciation of the G. That it and it would never have been pronounced with the J sound. It would have been a Gotland or Jutland. So the Gothic areas in the Iron Age were probably what is today Jutland, encompassing. You could probably also have called. In the Roman descriptions of Gothland, it actually compromises the Cimbrian Peninsula, which is Jutland, going along the Baltic coast all the way into what is today Lithuania, or at least to the Vistula, and probably further up. So the coastline there also was Gothic areas, and then the Gothic areas included the shorelines of Sweden. Uppsala is inland, would have been less inland at that time, but it's further north than the Gotish areas. And even parts of, if you look at the coast of the Norwegian southwestern coast, there are many place areas in Øst-Agder and Vestfold that have gout in them. So perhaps these also were, at least, quite likely touched by the part of Gothic sphere at a point. And then after Don the Mighty, Sjælland and Zealand and Fyn, the two major islands of Denmark, start being called Denmark. And also gradually Jylland and Vendsyssel are Denmark. They kept a separate land law until, I think, the 15th century. So they were seen as different countries under a united monarch. In a kingdom. And Norway is not mentioned as there's a little bit of controversy there. One says that King Harald Finehair was the first to be a unified king of Norway. But then when you read in other sagas, he was the first of his line to be it. And you actually have legendary kings that have ruled over the smaller kings in Norway. But they're far back, and how much there is in that. Usually Norway at this period, at least in Ynglinga Saga, are smaller kingdoms like the King Agder and Vingulmork and Viken. So Denmark, what is called Denmark in Ynglinga Saga, is definitely a power center. As of course Uppsala. Focus in Ynglinga Saga is Uppsala because that's where the Ynglinga line comes out, which later is the royal lineage through King Harald Finehair, and is the basis of all the rest of the Norwegian royal lineage and all this particular series of sagas, which is about the Norwegian royal lineage. Ynglinga Saga kind of just lays the groundwork for the lineage. So yeah. Okay. See you next time.